So good morning, everybody. So my name is Françoise NICOLAS. I'm the director of the newly named Center for Asian and Indo-Pacific Studies. The Indo-Pacific has been added to be in line with the new reality on the ground. So it's my pleasure and honor to have a conversation, to engage in a conversation with Deputy Minister of Economic Affairs from Taiwan, Mr. Chern-Chyi. And what I will be asking from him is to explain what is economic security for Taiwan. How do you define economic security? What are the policies that are put in place to defend, to protect this economic security? As explained earlier, Taiwan is in a very specific position. It is geopolitically an important player, but it is also economically in a very special place. Everybody depends on Taiwan with respect to some very advanced semiconductors. And so this is what makes Taiwan very special. And I guess economic security, as a result, is also very special as seen from a Taiwanese perspective. So, Mr. Deputy Minister, we are all ears. And so I'll give you the floor for, 15 to 20 minutes to explain what is economic security from your own perspective. And then I will ask you a couple of questions, clarifications, etc. So, Mr. Deputy Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor NICOLAS. This is a real privilege to be able to discuss with you and to have a dialogue with Ifri, one of the most prominent think tank in France. When we talk about economic security, as Ambassador Wu just mentioned, the threat we face actually is from the People's Republic of China. We have adopted a trade policy, the three pillars. The first one is to stabilize our relations with mainland China. And the second one is to connect to our like-minded partners. And the third is to integrate our manufacturers and our business entrepreneurs into international supply chain in a structured way. So let me describe the content of the policy. The first one is to stabilize the relations. We aim to maintain the status quo. However, everybody knows status quo is a very dynamic concept. With the internally more and more repressive and externally more and more aggressive, the Chinese posture has posed a threat to the economy of Taiwan. What does that mean? That means we have started from the very special idiosyncratic economic regime of China. The Chinese regime has a very special feature. They call it the socialist market economy with Chinese characteristics, which means they have their land are state-owned. Their banks are state-owned. Their financial institutions, including insurance and stock securities, are state-controlled. So they were able to have an industrial policy where all the companies can very quickly focus and then scale up and then export that will flood the global market. So before we open up our trade and investment relations with mainland China, we have strict control. There's no trade and investment with mainland China, but we gradually liberalize. And those guardrails, we keep it before 2016, before my current government took office, which means we have two guardrails to maintain the status quo. The first one is investment. The investment, we have inbound investment and outbound investment. Targeting the investment into mainland China, we require a negative list approach. Companies can invest in mainland China, but there are certain off-limit areas in, for instance, agricultural technology. Many of the breeds invented in Taiwan, they are prohibited from investing in China. Infrastructures, energies, those we consider will be a national security related areas, we do not allow our companies to invest in mainland China. Also, for technology-oriented areas, including semiconductors related areas, flat panel related areas, and some biotechnologies, we have reviewed by a committee composed of government officials, academia, and enterprise representatives to make sure we maintain the technology edge. And the rest is open for investment in China. However, for inbound investment, we have a positive list. We only open up listed areas where we have already opened before 2016 for Chinese investment into Taiwan, because they have that special feature that they can assemble and focus all their resources into one specific sectors. So without these guardrails, Taiwan companies will be very easily be flooded or merged into the Chinese hands. So that's we have the first guardrail here. Second guardrail is trade restrictions. Before joining WTO, we had a restriction of about cross-strait trade, which means a trade between China and Taiwan. When joining the WTO, we started to liberalize on our own. But because of very unique feature, China and Taiwan joined the WTO almost at the same time. When we negotiate our market access to join the WTO, China was not a member. So we continue to request China to negotiate on the WTO platform for a liberalized market access on trade. Now we still maintain about 2,500 items restricted from China to import into Taiwan. And we open a small window. If there's a special need, they are subject to ad hoc application where they can grant permission to import. Those are necessary to protect our domestic industries and economic securities. Those are the aspects of guardrails. And also, for economic security, most importantly is to diversify our market. In 2010, when that was a peak time when our outbound investment, 80% of Taiwan's outbound investment went to China. During the time, every year we have about $10 billion investment into mainland China. That certainly is not very healthy. So my government started our so-called new southbound policies, which is a response to the southbound policy. The first wave of southbound policy was when we opened up our investment into mainland China in the 90s. Government encouraged companies to also invest in Southeast Asia to hedge the risk. And now this is the second wave of new southbound policies. So we try to diversify our investment away from mainland China, but we do not change any regime of the investment review. So the investment into mainland China remains, but we try to make a cake bigger. So as a result of this policy, and also our companies now, they have grown over the decades. When working with international supply chain, they become, as Professor Yu mentioned, they become a key holder of some technologies. But I'd like to add, not only the technologies, our companies, they have earned the reliability, the trust of their brand leaders. They are reliable to protect a trade secret. They are reliable to deliver in quality. They are reliable to deliver in time. They are reliable to manage the production. So they follow the international supply chain to invest in China. Now they are working with the international supply chain to diversify the market, so-called de-risk. So far, our investment, if you compare 2022 to 2016, our investment to China dropped about 48%. It's a minus growth. But our investment to North America grew 184%. Investment to ASEAN areas increased 102%. And India, we started from a very low base. It's about 15 million, now grew to 360 million. It's a 600% growth. And to Europe, it's a relatively small growth, about 6%, but the accumulatedly 45%, about 45% of the investment to Europe what happened in past recent 5 years. So that is economic security. We trying to diversify our market. Secondly, we endeavor to connect to like-minded partners. So we hold bilateral economic policy dialogue, and then to accompany by private sector's dialogue platform to network, to establish associations, to establish business relations. This has proven to be pretty effective. We have recently greatly increased our collaboration with Central and Eastern European countries like Czech, Slovak, Poland, and Baltic countries, Lithuania. We are, of course, working with Germany and France. The recent investment from Taiwan to France, about 5 billion euros, is an example. And by investing in Europe and America, help our companies to keep in time with the global trend with respect to green energy, energy transition, and also to have the most up-to-date technology. So that's not just semiconductor, but in terms of energy transitions and also cloud services, all the software platforms. And third policy pillar is to integrate our supply chain with a structured establishment with our partners. Most recently, we signed the first batch of 5 trade agreements with the United States. It's so-called the 21st Trade Initiative. 21st Century Trade Initiative, actually, the agenda is in parallel to the American-led Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, the IPEF negotiations. So we were able to join the Global Trade Rules 2.0, so to speak. We update our trade regime in order to be compatible and in harmony with a global trading environment. We are also negotiating an investment agreement with Canada. We are negotiating also with the UK trade enhancement program. And also, we have concluded investment agreements in Southeast Asia and India, including India, Vietnam, and the Philippines. We have investment agreements. I have to say, a missing piece is with the European Union. We are hopeful that we can have a trade agreement with the Commission just to make our supply chain more integrated in a structured way with like-minded partners. So much so, that's the 3 pillars approach. We try to increase the resilience of our economy. So to work with the like-minded partners through trade investment is the baseline. And then to put the guardrail and maintain status quo for our trade relations with mainland China is the other aspect. Last but not the least, I'd like to also mention we are working with partners to have a technology research and development together in order to combat the climate change. Climate policy is an economic policy, a climate policy, an energy policy, as well as a security policies. Because Taiwan is an export investment-driven economy, and manufacturing occupied about 1/3 of our GDP. So the carbon reduction and net zero by 2050 is a very important policy of ours, and also is a daunting challenge. We need to work diligently in order to have a technology breakthrough, including the carbon capture and storage and reutilization, hydrogen, geothermals, and also photovoltaic and offshore wind farm. On this one, we appreciate the investment from Europe. Most of the European country, our investment coming from in this sector, offshore wind farm coming from European countries, which has helped we increase our renewable energy by the end of 2022, has reached about 22%. We are hopeful by 2026, we can increase to 25% of the capacity. And for in terms of generation, can reach 20% of our energy supply. But that is the way we have to put into effort. So much so, the economic security from my ministry's perspective is to increase our economic resilience, to increase our partnership with our like-minded partners, and then to endeavor to maintain the status quo of our relations with mainland China. I will stop here. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Minister. Perhaps I would like to come back on one very precise point that you made about diversification. And you mentioned the new southbound policy that was launched by Taiwan a couple of years ago. I always have some problems with this kind of policy. I understand that the government wants to push companies to diversify, to invest somewhere else, but governments can only do so much. The end decision is made by companies. So it's in the hands of companies to decide to move to Southeast Asia or not to move to Southeast Asia. So what kind of incentives are you providing? And the reason I'm asking that is that a number of other countries in the region have been pursuing exactly the same policies and sometimes not very successful. I'm referring in particular to Korea, for instance, which has been trying exactly the same thing, but with very limited success, to be honest. There is just one big success, which is investment in Vietnam. And this investment in Vietnam by Korean companies is just the result of a decision by Samsung to move to Vietnam. But otherwise, to the other countries, all the incentives provided have not been particularly successful. So I was just wondering whether Taiwan has been more successful in doing that and what kind of incentives the government is providing to companies to really push them and convince them that they have to move to Southeast Asia. In particular, I'm just taking this very specific example. So yes, can you provide us some details?
Sure, Professor, this is a great question. Let me also give you a bit detail of the new southbound policy with respect to economic and trade cooperations. First of all, this is a second wave of southbound policies, because in the first wave, Taiwanese investors already established some foundations in the region. And also because of some of the Chinese diaspora, ethnic Chinese, is also provide some help for the new investment to come. Well, I do recognize the private sector is the main actors in the market. The government can only do so much as a facilitators. However, if there is a global trend or external environmental change, government's help and guidance will be standing out as very important facilitation mechanism. For instance, our investment into mainland China, as I said, is almost about $10 billion up until 2017. But in 2018, when US and China started their trade conflict, if you would, and Mr. Trump imposed Section 301 tariff on Chinese import. In 2019, Taiwanese companies started to look for an alternative manufacturing base. That's so-called the China Plus One started. So when there's nothing changed, companies tend to maintain where they are. And they will be figuring out, they will do the planning, they will do the business planning or coordination, but they don't move until something happened. Until Russia invaded Ukraine, until US imposed tariff on Chinese import, until there is a flood because of a climate change, companies start to move. So government policy guidance and government facilitation will become necessary at that time. So for Taiwan's policy, first of all, as I said, there was some foundation starting from the 90s. And secondly, there is a feature of the Taiwanese companies because we are small and medium enterprise primarily. We don't have a big conglomerate like you say, Samsung. Samsung moved to Vietnam, they bring everything with it. But for Taiwanese supply chain, we tend to be small and medium enterprise. They go there, they have to form a cluster. They have to take care of each other, they look after each other, they look for local partners. They ask their predecessors and say, who can I seek help? And then they will help each other out. They compete, they collaborate, and they take care of each other with respect, not only on business, but also on family members. Kids need to go to school. The family need to do shopping. And they form a cluster. So you will see in Vietnam, the north part of Vietnam, the Taiwanese clusters focus on electronics. The south part of Vietnam, Taiwanese clusters will focus on textile, machinery. In Thailand, there's a Taiwanese cluster focusing on PCB, printed circuit board. In Malaysia, there's a Taiwanese cluster of OSAT, outsourced packaging testing. In Indonesia, there's a Taiwanese clusters of new energy. So we always form a cluster. That's why the government policies and facilitations works. Maybe not so much as people imagine everything depends on government, but that does have some effect of directing the investment flow.
Thank you very much. Well, I have another question about a concept that is very often used with reference to Taiwan, which is the so-called Silicon Shield. So Taiwan is supposed to be protected. I mean, that's what people argue, that Taiwan is protected because it is dominant in the semiconductor industry. And so as a result of this domination by Taiwan, all countries in the world depend on Taiwan. And so the idea of this term, this concept of Silicon Shield refers to the fact that everybody wants to protect Taiwan, since everybody wants Taiwan to be thriving in the semiconductor industry, since we depend on Taiwan for this absolutely key elements in a number of productions. So this Silicon Shield is valid if we look at the US. The US wants to protect Taiwan to be able to import all these semiconductors from Taiwan, but it also protects Taiwan from potential attack from mainland China, since the mainland also depends on Taiwan for semiconductors, and it is deterred from attacking Taiwan thanks to this domination of Taiwan in semiconductor industry. So this is the Silicon Shield idea. My question is, isn't there a risk that with the massive investment, recent massive investments, in particular by TSMC in the US, isn't there a risk that the Silicon Shield will end up being weakened? The value of Taiwan will kind of diminish as a result of these massive investments. And so the Silicon Shield will no longer apply or will be weakened. So what do you think? Is there a risk or not? What's your position on this issue?
Thank you. This is, again, a very good and very difficult question. Let me start by Taiwan's very existence depends on two things. The first is my government's policy toward mainland China. We have to be strong, firm, to defend ourselves, and then not to provoke China. We have a policy no provocation, neither escalation, and we will not instigate any conflict. So we welcome our friend to come to Taiwan to visit us, but we will not do anything that the international community will consider as a provocation. That's number one. Number two, we depend on support from our like-minded allies. And as a democracy, the French people will not support the French government to support Taiwan just because of silicon or just because of semiconductors. That's because Taiwan is a vibrant democracy. Taiwan has the freedom of speech. Taiwan embrace gender equality. Taiwan is a diversified society. Taiwan has the freedom of people to engage with each other. Taiwan is based on rule of law. Taiwan has a market economy. That's everything where the French government can have that support from its people to support Taiwan. So semiconductor may be important, but not the only thing. Okay, and come to semiconductors. The founder of TSMC, Dr. Morris Chern, he just said a couple of days ago, he said maybe 15 or 20 years later, within 20 years, Taiwan will not be the dominant manufacturers of semiconductors because the technology will improve, the industry will evolve, and the TSMC's deployment, the global deployment, has some advantage and necessities. The first of all, TSMC needs to respond to the customer, its customer's call to help to provide resilience to the customers. Secondly, TSMC needs to have the most up-to-date technology to work with its customer. TSMC's skill and technology comes from its collaboration with its customers. We have the trust and reliability of the global companies. TSMC works at the same time for Broadcom and Qualcomm. It works for Intel and AMD. It works for AMD and NVIDIA. All the competitors, they trust TSMC to manufacture for them. So the trust of the customer is very, very essential for TSMC to thrive. So technology, the trust is very important. And third, more importantly, as by deploying globally, Taiwan's semiconductors will be a living sector and always up to date with the global demand. And then that's where we would develop, evolve, and thrive. Look at the founder of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang. He's now the Tim Cook of AI, so to speak. When he came to Taiwan, he's a rock star. The young students just flock to him and ask him for his advice and opinions. So no longer manufacturing sectors. So maybe that's the direction where Taiwan will evolve. So I don't think, first of all, TSMC's global deployment will weaken Taiwan's position. On the contrary, I think the TSMC's global deployment will increase Taiwan's resilience and security.
Well, thank you, Mr. Minister. So you don't really buy this Silicon Shield story. Okay, well, up to you. Well, so perhaps you will like another quote better then. If I'm well informed, the head of the EU representative office in Taiwan, with a very complicated name to pronounce, Philip Gregorczewski, he said something recently about investment of Taiwan in the EU. And he said Taiwanese investment in the EU will enhance Taiwan's economic security. So do you agree with this statement that promoting more investment in the EU by Taiwanese companies will help ensuring Taiwan's economic security? Would you agree with this? What do you think?
Yeah, Philip is a good friend. I agree with him, but his statement is incomplete. Trade is more transactional. Like I sell you something, you pay me something, and then probably we'll see each other next time. So that's more transactional. But investment is different. We invest, then we come, then we stay, then we work together. So investment certainly has a more bondage for the parties to engage with each other. And then we invest our resource, we share our common future. So investment is important. But that's for the private sector to invest. As you said just earlier, government cannot force companies to invest. So government also needs to do their job. So that's why we are advocating a trade agreement with the European Commission in order to facilitate and to tie this investment bondage closer and firmer and more sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you. If I may abuse a little bit more of your time, I would have a final question. There is one type of threat to economic security, which has been rising recently, and these are cyber threats.
Yeah.
So I was wondering whether Taiwan has a specific policy with regards to such threats, and what is Taiwan putting in place to protect itself against the potential cyber threats, which are nowadays the major forms of threat to economic security.
Thank you. This is a very important question. But let me say at the outset, this is not within my portfolio. So I can only say as a layman, not as a professional. Cyber attack, we have enough resilience. Last year, when the United States Speaker, Ms. Nancy Pelosi, visited Taiwan, the Chinese PLA attacked our infrastructures, the cyber attack. So some of the billboard in the public area, including train station or convenience stores, they pop up some Chinese slogans, anti-government. But within 1 or 2 hours, they recovered. And then we review and then we improve our resilience on that. But I'd like to add, the real danger is coming from the disinformation and misinformation. They come through. The cyber attack is just a means for them to use, but the real weapon is in the misinformation, disinformation. And a recent report by the local magazines, and there's a supply chain and ecosystem initiated by the Chinese government, and then they have some industries located outside of China and Taiwan. They use cyber attack to deliver their misinformation, disinformation. I think that's a more difficult question to tackle. And that's what we have to, we are working on that, and my government is working on that, and I think that is a more serious issue. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Minister. It was great talking to you. It's too bad that you were only virtual. I really hope to host you in person at Ifri very, very soon. Well, thanks for your time. And now we move on to the rest of the discussion, but join me in thanking Mr. Deputy Minister for this very interesting session. Thank you.
Yeah, merci beaucoup, Professor, and I find it very stimulating. Thank you.
Thank you.